All right, everyone. On this episode of A Superwoman Handbook, we are talking with Lisa, who, like many of us, had a plan, was
Mhm.
living her plan slash the dream, and then life, which is a four-letter word, decided to throw her a curveball. And so we're going to pick up with her story on the other side of that curveball.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. That's literally what happens. I started my career in applied behavior analysis, and it just didn't feel like I dreaded Mondays anymore. I was so excited, so happy to go to work, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. I thought, this is it. This is the rest of my life. Whether I stay at this company or I go to a different company, I'm going to be behavior specialist, have my BCBA, and I'm going to be good. My career is set. And life definitely threw me a curveball, and I never passed the board certified behavior analyst certification. And it was something that it was very, very hard for me to kind of accept. And it's an extremely hard test. I took it multiple times over multiple years. And I got to a point where I was just like, I'm done. The amount of stress that comes with it, the amount of money you have to pay for as well, because you're paying for the test and you're paying for the testing center. It was too much. And I had tried everything, even tutoring to study for this. And that's where a lot of the money became super stressful too, because you're paying so much money for these testing and study strategies and it's not working. And when I got the results the last time, my supervisor I was with at the time, she opened it for me because I couldn't get it to open. And I didn't feel embarrassed at anything. I was just kind of like, wow, I felt lost. I was like, where do I go from here? I don't want to be just a behavior specialist for the rest of my life. And I just knew in my gut there was more. I was meant to do more. So that was the first kind of big challenge I've ever had. And it was very shocking at the same time as I'm not the type of person to fail a test, let alone fail it as many times as I did. um, but I felt like I really tried, and I felt like, okay, this is telling me I have to figure it out. I have to try to figure out what my next steps are. So that was the catalyst, first really big catalyst. And that sent me on a path that led to everything of where I am right now. And I could not be happier. I decided to go for my doctorate because of that. I figured, you know what, if I can't pass it with my experience I have, let me go for my doctorate. That'll help me study, that'll help me understand. And nope, still didn't happen. I took it during my doctorate more, and I still failed. And during the doctorate, I realized, I don't want to be in this field anymore. I want to switch. And I think that's the way I was always going. I think applied behavior analysis was always the foundation that I needed. And I never fully really understood why working with adults in residential group homes would be super beneficial to me down the road. Because when you're working with adults, you're not just working with disabilities and autism, you're working with mental health. And now that I'm switching to school psych, it's like, okay, now I understand it. I know the mental health disorders. And it also set a foundation for me for teaching my favorite class, which is abnormal psychology. So, I know the mental health disorders, the signs, the difficulties, the strengths, and I know the medications that go with it. So failing set me on a course for eventually figuring out why everything has happened the way it has happened. And in doing my first doctorate, I realized, like I said, I don't want to be an applied behavior analysis anymore. So where do I want to go? I tried switching my specialty a couple times, decided not to, and to finish the doctorate and use it to respecialize at another program. Well, that didn't happen either. So come in the second big challenge. I had an extremely difficult time during my dissertation, and school was amazing. They said, hey, you can switch your dissertation chair if you'd like. And I was so burnt out and exhausted, I said no. And I decided I'm going to go for a second master's and switch. I had started teaching part-time already, and doing my original doctorate gave me a love of research. It really helped me open up as a presenter too, and understand how to be in front of people because we were forced to do that. And I've got social anxiety where a part of it, and probably some of the biggest part, is I get extremely nervous in front of a class of my peers. And that class, when we were virtual, was the first time I wasn't nervous. I would get nervous when we'd be together at residency, but everyone was so nice that it made it a lot easier. But when we were virtual, it really, I never felt nervous. I never went red, and it wasn't easy to participate if a professor required it so I can get that A. So, going to the doctorate, it didn't help me pass the BCBA, but it helped me in so many other ways. It helped me start to overcome that anxiety, and it helped me realize I wanted to teach and I wanted to go into research. And the research part is something that's really coming together this year, so I'm very, very excited about that. So basically, the dissertation process, it's as tough as everybody says. And for me, it just did not work. It gives me so much respect for anybody who does it. So I withdrew, took a break, and decided to go for a second master's degree in school psychology and was going to fully do the certification. And you know what? I got talked into doing the doctorate, which honestly was the best thing that could have happened. I love my classmates. They are just as amazing as the ones I had in my first doctorate. And I'm thankful they talked me into doing the PsyD instead, because it's going to give me the freedom I want and need. Being in applied behavior analysis, I felt very pigeonholed. So that's part of why I wanted to leave. I'm a very creative person who needs to be able to be flexible. And if you don't have the board certified behavior analyst certification, you're an assistant, or you're a behavior specialist doing everything a BCBA does, but not getting paid the money, which isn't fair. So I felt very pigeonholed because I had actually taken a step back and switched to working with kids while I was trying to get the BCBA and my doctorate. I learned so much doing that, and I learned a lot from people in this field that were not great people whatsoever. So that's part of why, too, I want the doctorate, because I'll be able to have my own private practice and not have to have that person over me who, was controlling or jealous. So that was my experience with that. It was a great experience. I learned so much about autism, and, I don't regret it whatsoever, but it definitely was not easy, so I had to build myself back up in this field, and I worked my way to early intervention and then worked my way into teaching as a professor full time. So, leaving the first doctorate set this amazing foundation for where I am right now. And that was a huge catalyst for my career, because if I hadn't decided going to school psych, I wouldn't be working the PsyD. And I only have 2 more years left and the most amazing internship that I cannot wait to start, which never ever happens for me. I always have to fight and work so much harder than everybody else. So getting this internship is a dream come true. And it's just nice to be in this place, and during my original doctorate too is when I wrote my first book, Let's Talk, A Story of Autism and Friendship. And I published it in 2020, and everything has kind of blossomed and bloomed from there. The first doctorate set the foundation for me starting to come out of my shell more and back to who I really am. And becoming a published author just capitalized on that and pushed me even farther. So I've had a lot of obstacles, especially in the applied behavior analysis sector, with a very controlling boss who I always say, no matter what she was controlling, she still trained me well. Because the second company I went to, I was by myself. No supervisor over me, everything. I made my own hours. I wrote my own plans. So she trained me well. From that to that supervisor at that company, she was very jealous, part of why I left. And then another jealous supervisor when I was working with kids who tried to basically ignore me. So I didn't have any help with studying for the BCBA. So she basically tried to kind of sabotage me in studying for the BCBA. So it's been a road, and it's part of why I love teaching so much. I don't have anybody over me, looking over me. I have freedom, but at the same time, I'm very, very lucky in some of the schools that I work for. They're absolutely incredible. So it's kind of been like this step by step by step of pushing and fighting to get where I want to be and become the person I think I was always meant to be and have this career. The doctorate prepared me for how to do a poster on research, and I'm presenting 2 this year. So I'm really excited about that. I've taught research and abnormal for the last almost 4 years between 2 different schools, which has been my favorite. And having the ability to come on and do things like this. The school I went to was online and we would have live virtual classes, and that really pushed me to be comfortable with this. So each thing has really kind of gone in sequence and pushed me to become the person I am now. And it's, when I thought the worst thing that could have ever happened to me was failing a BCBA, it ended up being the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. And I tell my students all the time, if I did not fail that exam, because I want to motivate them, I want them to see failure as not a final thing. So I tell them all the time, I won't say how many times I took the test, but I tell them, I will not admit how many times I failed it, but I tell them, don't ever take failure or no as a final answer. Take it either as a lesson and pivot, or go and apply again and try again. So that's my story.
Oh my gosh, I was taking so many notes while you were
I
chatting.
saw.
So many things I want to unpack with you. Okay, first of all, let's just put the obvious out there. JFK Jr., who we all admit, RIP,
He's
is
cuckoo.
like the cutest guy on the absolute planet,
Yeah.
next to Prince William. Please call me Prince William. But anyway, he took the bar like 3 times, I think, or like some just tremendous amount of time.
He
And
did? I didn't know that about JFK Jr.
yes, I heard, yeah, like,
Wow.
it was to the point where I think he was just like, "Please just let me in already. Like, can I just, like, sleep on the floor in here?"
They say the
So
BCBA is harder than the California State Bar. The
oh, I
whole
believe it.
thing is applied, and what they do is there's always 2 answers that are very obvious that could be possible, and then it's your job to figure out which one is the correct one. Yeah, and no 2 tests are ever alike. You can be sitting next to somebody taking the test, and you have 2 totally different tests. And one of my professors is on the board who writes those questions from that school. So I was just like, "Oh my god."
Well, that segues to our next topic.
I
Um,
JFK,
toxic
he is really cute. He's adorable.
right? And even he can fail tests. So, and he's like, like Camelot. He's like our prince. I mean, so
I
even our
know.
royalty can, fail their
Exactly.
tests. So it's like,
And you keep going. Kim Kardashian failed the baby bar the first time.
I know.
I think about that too because, and I know people, and I've seen on Facebook who've taken the BCBA more than I did and then finally passed it. And I've only met in the last 11 years, I think, 2 BCBAs that passed it on their first time. Every other one that I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot, have taken it multiple times. It's extremely difficult and it's expensive.
I mean, it's
It's
almost
pretty
like you're
expensive.
not royalty if you haven't failed a couple times. I
I
mean, as in
agree.
yeah.
100%, and there's no harm in failing because
Mhm.
it really it motivated me to study better, to do
Yeah.
better. And then when I took it that final time, I was like, that's it. I'm not taking it again. And I really felt for the first time in my life lost. I'd
Yeah.
never felt like that before. So it was a very interesting feeling.
So let's talk about, okay, moving to you mentioned like how your boss had written or one of your professors had written the test.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I just assumed that in the field of psychology, everyone had their life together and would be perfect examples of humans, and there wouldn't be any Oompa Loompas in the group. So how does this happen? Because you mentioned your supervisors a couple times, and I was like, girl, you're in like the field where everyone's supposed to understand this.
So in the field of applied behavior analysis, 2 things happen when you pass the BCBA, at least in New Jersey. It either goes to your head and you think this is my experience in my state. I don't know about other states. This is my experience in my state. And it either goes to your head and you think you're God's gift or you're amazing at what you do. it's one or the other. You're like the nicest person and you're amazing at what you do, or you just think your SHIT don't stink and you know
Mhm.
everything. And it's really difficult. I went from company to company when I worked in with adults to the last one, because I actually had a good BCBA supervisor at the last one. And I also worked for multiple companies in the field of in-home ABA. And that was because it was really hard to get clients at certain hours, and you're also not making enough money. These hours can be 2, 3 hours at a time with one student. And honestly, the parents are more the client than the kid. So
Reminds me of
it,
when I coached cheerleading. The
yeah.
moms would be like, "Why is she not in the front row?" And I'm like, "Do we have to have this conversation? Are we watching the same child? Like, how do I say this?"
Oh my gosh, yes. And I would feel bad for the BCBAs because I'm like, you have to stick with these families. And that's one reason I'm glad I failed too, because if I got a family that I didn't want to work with, I would say peace out. But you're not
Mhm.
supposed to do that when you're a BCBA.
I love that.
I think I would have been miserable if I passed.
So that's kinda like I wanted to do let's do a comparative analysis. Let's do a get ready with me, get ready with me, Lisa morning, if you had passed your test versus now. So let's go with what your day would be like if you'd passed the test.
So if I passed the test, I would have been working for a company and doing the exact same thing I would have been doing as a behavior specialist, which is doing evaluations and assessments and writing behavior plans and training behavior therapists who are basically like the assistant to do
Mhm.
one-to-one therapy with children with autism. But I would also, and I did the same thing with adults. A lot of the parents had my phone number. I had a second phone. Staff would call me in the middle of the night. Or so with adults, even if I had my BCBA and worked with adults, I would get phone calls in the morning. Oh, the police are here. Yeah, so those calls were really fun. So that's what I would be doing as a BCBA if I had stayed in the field. Is I would be dealing with phone calls randomly in the middle of the night, phone calls from parents, depending on what age group I worked with, phone calls saying the police are here. It's not uncommon at all, but it's not easy to work with. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Alright, now let's do a get ready with Lisa now. Like, what is your day like now?
So right now I work hybrid. So I work right now I only have one class that I'm teaching in person at a award-winning community college. UCNJ is amazing. So I'm teaching one class in person. So Tuesdays and Thursdays I get up at the same time. I go teach in person like I did today, which I absolutely love. I usually get emails from my students Tuesdays and Thursdays when I get up saying, I'll be
Mhm.
late. I can't come in because. So I'm like, okay, I check those
Their
when I
hair hurts, they can't come today.
yeah, and it's always the same students, so I expect it. So I don't check those till I get in, but I know they're there.
Mhm.
So I go and teach. I come home and I sign in for one of my schools that I'm hourly. And while I'm hourly doing work for them, I do work for the other schools that I work for, or I do schoolwork. So the days that I work from home, fully Monday, Wednesday, Friday, same thing. I get up at the same time, take care of my cats, sign in for Strayer, and do work for Strayer. Then I work on SNHU. I always do PIC later. I work for multiple schools right now because my internship. I don't typically work for all these schools, but it's just to get ready for internship. But yeah, I only have one school that I'm hourly for. So while I'm doing work for Strayer, I can do work for other stuff. And I take breaks in between, go for walks. I work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the morning, then come home and do work. And it's great because I get to cuddle my cats at the same time. They
Mhm.
hang out with me. So it's a lot less stress than it was when I was working with adults, or even with kids, because I never knew what text I was going to wake up to, because the kids were amazing. Every single child I worked with was amazing. 50% of the families were not. I worked with some amazing families I had a parent just text me like a month ago about preschool for her little one getting to the lottery. So I worked with some really amazing parents too, but the ones that were not were just draining and exhausting. So now
So,
it's
first
not.
question from there, do you still have 2 phones? A burner? Do you
No,
still have
that was when I worked with adults, and that was a work phone, so I gave that back, thankfully. I do have a work Google number but I don't use it very often. And I kind of forget about it, to be honest. So I kind of use that for like jobs, work, if I need it. My two supervisors have it, but I kind of just forget about it.
In all the conversations I've had with women on personal and professional and so many different topics, kind of the one common thread, or we'll say harbinger of this is about to get real, is when you have two phones. That is like that
You're
is
not
the
supposed to turn it on silent either. And I got to a point where like, I'm like, screw this. I have to, because they're calling me at like 2 o'clock in the morning. They're texting me at like 3 a.m. about ridiculous things. I'm
Mhm.
like, God, I gotta get sleep. This is like, no, like it's just, it's a lot, when
I
you're
love that.
working with this field, there's not enough resources, not enough help and support. So when they find somebody they trust and respect and will help and support them, they really cling on. I don't blame them.
So it sounds like you made a plan. We have little Sophia trying to come on camera here
Oh,
with
you
us.
say hi. It's
She's
my
like,
kitty's birthday too. He's over here getting lots of pets.
"Oh, I
Hi,
love it."
Sophia.
Yeah, this is what talking about, having flexibility and no stress. Like I like that kind of like you, my life took a little bit of a different turn career wise. But it allows me to be like I love it. So
That's
and then
great.
that's kind of was the overarching statement when I asked you at the beginning, kind of how did we want to phrase and position your story, and you said you make a plan and God laughs. And I was replaying that in my mind as you were telling the story, and it was I just had this really like cartoon visual of you just like running forward. You've got this plan, and God's like rock, boulder,
That's what
truck,
it's like. That's what
fiery
I feel like
truck,
it's
like
like.
give her like
Anytime something good happens, a monkey wrench happens. I swear to
yeah.
God, that's just what it's like.
It's like he was like, "Girl, what do I have to do to get you to stop? Like, do I have to like put a ravine? Like,
I
what
know.
has to happen?" And so
Thankfully, there has been no ravine.
and I love that you know, there's a difference in giving up and letting go, and I still struggle with that myself. And so not to speak for you, but it feels like you kind of had a little bit of that. You
I
had
did,
this
I did.
dream, you had pushed,
Mhm.
and I sometimes I get this, you're not going to defeat me attitude, which keeps me down the path even more. And
Great.
so I applaud you that you were able to overcome both of those things,
Thank
to make the pivot that you needed to make to land where you're ultimately happier. Like,
thank you.
I love that. That is, you know, it's like if hindsight always being 2020, if we were doing this podcast and you said yes, but I stuck with it and I got I'd have been like, no, bad. We don't applaud that. No, because this is not what you're supposed to be doing. So I love that you had that bravery in your
Thank
story,
you.
which kind of leads to, let's say that there's someone who is in this situation right now with whatever this,
Mhm.
how did you know that your gut was talking to you? And then what made you decide to say, okay, we're going to make a change?
I think it was because when I got burnt out, I was definitely like, I can't do this test again. I can't put myself through it again. I had tried tutoring twice. I'd paid $500 for studying material and study group. I had literally tried every single type of study material available, Facebook groups. I even worked with a woman who runs a Facebook group and does all the questions and stuff because she worked at the company I was with. And I was just like, I physically, emotionally, mentally cannot do it to myself again. So that was a really big indicator of the fact that either I figure it out and either stay where I am and change, or, give myself a break and then go back and do it. So I really had to take the time to think about it. Every time I thought it and I felt so lost, and didn't have a direction, my gut was just like, you can figure this out, So I went to the research and I started looking at different things in the field, started thinking, and I was like, you know what? What do you do when you fail a test? You go back and you study
Mhm. Yep. Because
because
you're a failure. That's how you feel.
that's exactly how I felt. I'm like, what did I always do in school whenever I get a C or fail a test? I'd go back and study.
Mhm.
And I thought, how do I do this? Because I've studied so much, my doctorate. So that's what made me feel like, okay, let's do that. And if I do that, then, maybe more doors will open for me as a BCBA D as well. So I don't always listen to my gut, but I've learned over the years that it is more correct than, I always thought it was. So I learned to listen to my gut. So, in that feeling of being lost, I was like, I don't like this feeling. There's 100% something more out there for me. And I just knew I had to figure it out. I'm very determined. I know I'm going to have a career. I've wanted my career since I was a kid. I was like, this can't be it. I really want to be like my supervisor. Well, I thought I wanted to be a director of a program. I thought, I wanted to eventually go back to working with kids. And I was like, I have to figure this out. I was just very, very determined. And I didn't like that feeling of feeling lost, so I knew I had to listen to my gut. I knew I had to figure it out.
So while we're talking about gut feelings, and you can say pass on this too, 'cause it's another trick question. When the test scores came in that last time and you had your colleague open them, what did you want it to say?
Pass.
Really?
I did. I wanted it to say pass. It wasn't so I started my doctorate in January of 2018, and it was about maybe 6-7 months into it. I knew I did not want to stay in the field. I knew I didn't want to be in that field anymore. And I switched to working with kids that summer. So that might have been part of why I knew I didn't want to stay in the field. I love that last company I worked for. I still, from time to time, talk to my old supervisor. She's amazing. She's a supervisor I model myself after. She was one of the best I've ever had. Such a good person. And the only reason I stayed was because of her and the VP at the time. And the things were changing, they were going to fee for service. I got denied a raise twice, which was not my VP's fault. It was because we were changing fee for service. And I got burned down. That's why I was like, let me take a step back, work with kids, start my doctorate. And when I started working with kids that summer 2018, I immediately was like, I hate this. I don't want to do this. So I looked into organizational psychology, which I still really like. And it's kind of similar to what I do now with trainings, but I didn't want to lose the year of work I put into the doctorate. Lo and behold, 2 more years later, I almost lose everything anyways, but, from withdrawing. But even with that, I don't look at it as a loss because it taught me so much. Yep. It set such a foundation for where I am now that even though I went through all that schooling, I don't see it as something negative or a regret. It was something positive, and I left a company I loved, but I think if I had stayed, I would have been miserable because the way they were changing the hours, the fee for service, it would never have worked, so even though I wanted to say pass, it ended up being the best thing that could have happened because of everything else that came afterwards.
See, if you had asked me to put my answer in a jar to be broken and open, I seriously would have written down. I had this death by cop feeling. I said, she wants death by cop. She wants this to say fail so she can release herself from this. So I was really eager to hear your story about, still with it, still wanting it to say pass because you're not. That's how. I think that's how deep it is. Even though you weren't. You knew intuitively, you knew that you were on the right path. It is so ingrained in us not to fail, not to quit, that even when we know something is wrong, we're going to see it through. And so you definitely followed that, that trend. And so now I want to kind of unpack some things just for people who are listening, who aren't in the field, who kind of need to know. So when you say open your own private practice, what would you be doing in that private practice versus teaching?
In school psychology for a private practice, I can consult in schools. So instead of the school district having a school psychologist that just works for them, I can come in and consult. So I can do testing, I can do observations and give my recommendations. I can sit on IEP meetings, and I can take test scores and make recommendations. I can also do, as a consultant, I can do remote work. There's
Okay.
been a big push for remote work as a school psychologist. I plan to get my license in the tri-state area, so the surrounding states, once I get it, because I'm actually going to have my national certification. So that's the really cool thing about Jersey is my school's not accredited with us, so it means I have to get my national cert, which me being an overachiever, I would have done anyways. So I'm gonna get that so that I can do more. And the great thing too is I want to do international. I've actually got a colleague overseas now coming here to do more schooling for herself, and I'm doing a collab with another author who's Italian. And I'm starting to travel this year for work too. So I would like to start to do some international work as well as school psychologist. So having that all under my brand and my business would be pretty amazing to do. And it gives me flexibility,
Mhm.
as my own private business. I can also work alongside neuropsychologists. I can hire people in ABA to contract out as
Mhm.
consultants, to contract out as behavior therapists. So being in this, I can work alongside mental health counselors. I have a friend who's a CADC, certified alcohol drunk
Mhm.
counselor. She can come on and work in the business too. We can work together as partners. So getting my doctorate and having this private practice, the ends are completely, open, and there's just no end in sight for what I can do basically.
All right. So you talk about these ends, and you talk about your supervisor who had a really positive impact on you. What do you let's be like morbidly cool,
Uh-huh.
and let's fast forward to the end of your career, the end of your what would you want to hear one of the students that you've worked with, what do you want to hear them say about you?
That because I told them never take no for an answer, they did not, and they are happy as anything, making a difference in their career as well. That I inspired them to do that. You know, I've talked to a lot of students. One I have in my class right now, and she's very similar. I see a lot of myself in this girl. I know she's gonna watch this and know who she is, but I definitely see myself very similar in her. And I see her trying to figure things out kind of like how I did, going through things in my career. And if I can impact one student like her to keep going, to, not care if you get rejected from a job, apply again later, apply to another one, or if you fail a test, go and retake it, or decide if maybe this is not for you, just don't stay stagnant. Figure
Mhm.
out what makes you happy and keep going forward. I feel like so many people settle. And if I can inspire one person to not do that, I think that I would say I have had a hugely successful career.
I love that. So I think there is, I mean, I've learned just how big the world is, even though we feel like we're in a little bubble. And I know that there is someone somewhere who just opened up an envelope that says you didn't get into the college you wanted, or you didn't get the job you wanted, and they're looking in the mirror with that piece of paper, valuing their life, basically valuing their performance, valuing them. And so sitting there probably questioning their value, and to hear those words, that's my goal with this podcast, is to have those conversations, because I think so often we have them, and we feel them alone
I agree.
in our kitchens, in our bathrooms, on the bathroom floor, crying sometimes. And so to hear those words, someone like you who's walked the walk, I'm so glad that you're in the field that you're in, and you have access to the type of world that you need to be in to have that kind of impact. Is just talk about, God having a bigger plan.
I agree. And I'm honestly very, very lucky and very, very blessed. There's a lot of the stuff I haven't talked about, and that's why I wanted to come on here, because now being an author and being psychology is kind of like blending together. And one of my family members knows pretty much all of this stuff because I'm super close to her and I always text her. But I learned last semester, and I'm trying to get better at it, I don't tell my students enough. I would
Mm.
always get not always, but I've gotten the comment enough at union that, oh, she doesn't have the experience to teach this, which I'm like, what? And then one of my students last semester, I had them interview somebody in the field for their presentation, and he did me, which was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And also one of the nicest things that somebody could have done. And it made me realize I don't talk about everything I've gone through in my career enough. And I definitely don't tell my students enough about my career. So I really want to talk about what I've gone through, the struggles I've gone through, and how I've overcome them and really gotten to the place that I am and the place that I'm going to. It's not easy. It's a really big struggle. And I think our kids today, and I had this conversation with a couple of my students today because they're pandemic kids that were in 8th grade when pandemic hit. And I was talking to them and they were telling me about this anxiety that they have, and they went back in person and how it was like awkward and different. And, we need to have these conversations coming from people like me who have been through so much in the career for kids like that, who, are getting the anxiety, not getting what they were supposed to because of the pandemic, but they need to see that somebody else did it so they could do it too. So that's why I really wanted to do this podcast. And I love the fact that you have this.
Thank you. And thanks for coming on. It's kind of like a verbal version of American Ninja Warrior. Like people need to know that someone, I watch American, I watch it and I'm like, oh, she's my size. She's like 3'5". She did it. I can get up there and I can swing. And then I am not an American Ninja Warrior. But it is, we need that.
Exactly. You need that push. And I'm with you. I've done those obstacles and for some reason I cannot do them, but I can go and travel on my own to a foreign country,
like it's so American Ninja Warrior there.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's so strange, and with the way the world is right now, we need this positivity. We need this push and this motivation to know that no matter what the world throws at you, you can do it too. The world pushes back at you, but you can push back at that and figure it out. Like, don't let it stop you. It shouldn't matter. We need our kids to know that and feel that. I didn't get into my field to my late 20s. I had to watch all my friends in high school that I grew up with, go for their master's at 23 or get into the field right out of undergrad. I went through for a 5th year of undergrad. I spent 5 years to get my bachelor's. And I didn't get into my field until my late 20s. So, I've had a very different kind of road, but I'm also really thankful for that because it's really shaped who I am and where I'm going, which I'm really excited about.
So you talked about your book.
Yeah.
Where can people find your book if they want to read more, and how can they find you online if they want to connect and follow?
So right now I'm a children's book author. I have 11 award-winning children's books, and I have 2 anthologies.
I'm sorry, 11?
I do, yeah.
Did you say 11?
Yes.
Okay, because our Wi-Fi here is a little shaky, and it kind of, I was like, girl, 11. Okay, sorry, keep going. You have 11 children's
I know it's crazy. Number 12 is coming out next month, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are really fast.
Are you gonna do a 13, or are you gonna skip it and name it?
Oh no, I'm a little nervous to do 13 because of the number. I'm a little superstitious, but my 13th children's book is actually one of my favorites and one of my most special to me because one of my little cousins asked me to write it, and both him and his brother had a very heavy hand in helping me write it. So I feel like that's really good luck, and I'm very, very excited for when they do number 13 as well. So it's going to be pretty amazing. I'm excited for that. But it's crazy. Yeah, 5 years, 11 children's books, 2 anthologies, and I have an anthology coming out later this year where I wrote a chapter. There'll be more on that coming out, but it'll talk more about similar things to this, gaining my power, my confidence. So that's really exciting. You can find my books at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can find my first 3 books in the Let's Talk series everywhere. So basically,
you can find my first 3 books here.
Well, I would love for the rest of them to be able to be found everywhere. Just walk in a Target and be able to be like, I want that. But Ingram Spark it's difficult to get your stuff on there formatted right. So everything's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But for my students at Union, you can get them at the library. I have it donated there. I have it donated at a bunch of libraries around Central Jersey too. You can always message me on my social media, and I do ship free and sign it. Facebook is Books by Lisa Jacovsky, and Insta and Threads are Diverse Ink Books, and TikTok is Lisa Jay author. So you can always message me on any of those. I have another festival coming up next month in Princeton. So you can check out my social media for that. And I have 2 festivals in the fall. Trying to think about this. There's so much going on. So, if you want to follow my social media, you can see where I'm going to be at if you want to come say hi, or you can always message me for a copy of any of my books. It's pretty awesome.
I love this. I cannot think. So I was so looking forward to this
Yeah.
interview today, and I applaud your bravery for making a change in your life and your vulnerability to talk about it
Thank you.
and to just kind of share that journey. And I can't wait to see book number 13, 23, all of those. You should name that one MJ, like for Michael Jordan. Like,
Maybe I'll put that in the dedication. That's hilarious. My little cousins have read book 13 because it's very much centered around them and for them, and they love it. So that, as long as they love it and they're proud of me as their cousin and aunt, that makes it all worth it. My family means the world to me.
Mhm.
And those 2 little boys are the best thing their mom ever did. We grew up basically as sisters. Her brother basically was my brother. My brother was their brother, so even though we're not blood family, we're all still
Mhm.
consider each other family. And it just, as long as they love my work, that makes me happy. And they apparently brag about me, so I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
I think you just very organically and authentically kind of wrapped up a good, like the perfect thing for us. Like, because we started this kind of talking about your dream from a child to, if your original career, and how that's how many of us start our lives. We get these, they start harassing you. It's bullying, honestly. You get bullied into picking a career when you're
Because people,
3 days old and you don't know yourself. You don't know how to hold a crayon. And they're like, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? I'm like, I don't know. Be a teacher. I don't know. And so, I mean, so you talk about that, but then what you said was being their aunt, their cousin, that's your biggest achievement. I
it
mean,
really
that,
is. And, my family is the biggest support, my biggest cheerleaders, all of my family. And I am who I am and where I am because of how my parents pushed me
mhm,
growing up. I'm the first one to go to college and get a degree. That was very important to them. And it's because of them that, I wanted to make sure I had a career, that I had something to fall back on. I was always told, be independent, don't ever depend on anybody. And I think that really gave me the drive and the goal of wanting to have that in my own career. And I'm thankful for that. And to this day, my parents, my aunt, my cousins, my grandmother, my
mhm.
whole family, my brother, everybody they're my biggest cheerleaders in the entire world. They're the first people I text with anything new. Even before it comes out, I go to them for their advice. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So I'm very, very, very lucky and very blessed to have the family and the people in my life that I do.
But I feel so lucky that you shared your story today, and I can't wait to just like see more from you. So thank you so much for
Thank
everything
you
today.
for having me.